Hey, how you doing? Arthur Wu here, and the topic of today's video is going to be, should I buy or rent camera and lighting equipment? This is a super fun topic for me to talk about because I'm always having these conversations with people, whether they're filmmakers or cinematographers or videographers. I'm somewhat of a techie and a gearhead, and so it's just fun for me to kind of look at the latest equipment, how it can work into my workflow. So I'm always talking to people, whether they're at the beginning of their career or people who are very experienced. When we see a new piece of equipment come out, it's conversation is always like, oh, did you see this? That looks really cool. Do you think you could incorporate it into your workflow? And so I really thought it would be a fun topic to make a video about because it's something that I'm always incorporating into conversations pretty frequently. So just a little bit about my background. I've been on both sides of the equation where I've owned a majority of the gear that I use on set, as well as renting a lot of the equipment that I use on set. So I started out in a small market as an owner-operator, one-man band, doing very small projects for people. And at the time, back in San Francisco, renting didn't really seem like a good option because basically the entire budget would go to rentals and then I wouldn't be left with much. Whereas if I owned a camera and I owned some lights, then I could use that on every single shoot and eventually sort of break even on the stuff that I was purchasing over time. And then I got to a stage in my career where I moved to New York City. I started working on much larger projects where you couldn't own everything. You had to basically rent. And so there was a point in time where I was renting most of the equipment I was using on set. And over the past couple of years, I've really started seeing the opportunity to own equipment again, just because of the pandemic and the style of shoots that people are doing, smaller crews and so on and so forth. And it really made me take a look at equipment ownership again. And so I started getting back into it. And so I think I have a unique perspective on it just because of what I've been through in terms of like buying equipment and then selling it and then buying it again. So really when we're talking about equipment ownership, it really depends on the situation that you're in. So I can't really give everyone the same advice. However, I think it might be helpful for you guys if you're trying to decide whether or not you should buy certain pieces of equipment the way I think about it. Because I have a list of things that I often think about when I'm purchasing equipment or thinking about purchasing equipment. And at a certain stage in my career, I was often agonizing, oh, should I buy this? Should I not buy this? Looking at every single review. I've kind of gotten past that stage because, the gear acquisition syndrome, the gas is real. And if you're not careful, it can consume a lot of your time where you're thinking more about the gear than actually what the gear can do for you in terms of shooting the projects that you want to shoot to get the imagery that you want to get. That's always the number one thing, the creation process, not the gear buying process. So with that being said, let's go through the list. So the number one thing that I think about when it comes to buying equipment is the frequency of use. And what I mean by that is how often am I going to be using it in terms of the number of shoots that I'm doing. If I'm using something on almost every single shoot, to me that's a no-brainer to purchase. Not only because it affords me the opportunity to use the gear that I want to use, but also it's a great opportunity for return on investment. So gear ownership can be a very good investment depending on how it's played. Let's take a monitor, for example, a 5-inch onboard monitor. Let's just say it costs $1,500. And that might seem a lot from the get-go, but if you break it out for a certain number of shoots over a certain number of years, you can start to see how the numbers add up. So let's just say it costs $1,500 out of your pocket. And then let's just say you rent it to a production for $50. It'll take you around 30 shoots to make back to $1,500. And let's just say you're only doing around 30 shoots a year. That's like somewhere between 2 and 3 shoots a month. After the first year, if you've done 30 shoots, you will have made $1,500 back. And so your investment was 100% covered. The monitors paid off. And monitors will actually last a while if you take care of them and if you don't put them in crazy situations. And so let's just say your monitor will last 3 more years after that. So every year after that for 3 more years, you're making, and if you keep the same number of shoots, you're gonna be making $1,500 a year on that monitor. So you can quickly see how once it's paid off, the $1,500 seems like a lot in the beginning, but once it's paid off over time, it'll net you $4,500 profit. And then when you start to multiply that across all the pieces of equipment that you own, it can be a really good investment. The caveat with that, I would say, is not to push your equipment on to production if it doesn't make sense. And that's always something that your personal integrity is going to have to carry you through. Because I know a lot of people who they will try to push as much of their equipment as possible, even if it makes no sense. I've worked with a number of camera operators and gaffers. I'm not gonna name any names, but the first conversation around gear is always like, oh, well, I have this, this, and this, and this, and I think it'd be great to bring onto the production when we really haven't even had the creative conversation yet. And so for me, it's like that always kind of turns me off because I want to know that people are on something because they're really into the project, not because they're trying to make a quick buck off me. I think that the investment part of it is an added bonus to you doing a good job anyway. So to me, that's very important, not to push things onto a project that don't make sense. So if I own a certain lens and it doesn't make sense for the look that we're trying to go for, I'm not going to push it. It doesn't make sense. I think about things longevity wise. You're going to be working with certain directors and productions over the course of your career. Do I really want to be steering them in the wrong direction just so I can make a quick buck in that moment? No, I don't want to do that. I want to do right by them. And if it means not making a certain amount of money on a certain shoot because it doesn't call for that creative, I want them to be happy. So the next thing on my list is availability of rentals. If you live in a large market like me, like in New York City, where rental houses are pretty accessible in terms of the number of them, that's part of the reason why when I started getting out of the gear game, why I started renting a lot, because gear was really easy to get. But I've also talked to people when I've traveled to do certain jobs. I've talked to like certain gaffers and camera operators and other DPs where the closest rental house is like 45 to 60 minutes away in terms of driving, and so you're burning 2 hours on the front on getting equipment, and then on the back end by returning equipment. So you're already burning 4 hours doing that whole thing, and so for them, people who work in certain markets, it doesn't make sense to necessarily rent every single time, especially if they have multiple shoots per week. It often starts to make sense to own certain equipment because it's easier logistically. All right, and the next one on the list is specialty items. All right, so let's take an example of a specialty item, macro lens. I shoot with macro lenses very infrequently. It does happen, maybe about 2 to 3 times a year. Okay, so let's just do the numbers really quickly. It costs approximately, I think, $2,500 for a Tokina macro lens. And let's just say that I shoot with the macro lens twice a year. So it rents for maybe 50 bucks. So if I do the math, it'll take me around, I think, 25 years to pay back the lens. And at that point, that doesn't make any sense at all. And so from just an ROI perspective alone, I think it makes sense to rent in that situation. So that's when I would rent. So the last thing on the list is storage and maintenance. And this is something that probably have to worry about a little bit later on in the career. But once you get over a certain amount of Pelican cases taking up space in whether it's like your living room or your office or your bedroom or whatever, it can get a little overwhelming, especially when you have to pack the whole thing all the time into the vehicle that you're transporting it with. And so that's just one thing to prepare for. So every time I think about buying something, I'm like, okay, well, is it going to fit into the storage space that I have, or does it make more sense to rent, and so on and so forth. And so that's the reason why I haven't bought a lot of lighting equipment, because not only does it require large cases, it also requires stands. So C stands, light stands, and those weigh a lot and they take up a bit of space as well. And so I've kind of kept it to the camera side, camera accessories, cameras, lenses, and so forth. And I own a couple of lights, just enough to do a small job. But when it comes really to the medium-sized or large jobs, it's all rentals at that point. All right, so I'm just going to wrap up this video. Hope that was helpful for you in terms of seeing my thought process when it comes to purchasing or renting equipment. I really think that at the end of the day, it comes back again to the creative, to what you're trying to achieve, to the art that you're trying to make, or to the product that you're trying to make. And the gear supports that. Anytime I see myself thinking too much about the gear, about the return on investment, I always have to reset and think to myself, all right, what is it that I'm really trying to do here? I'm not trying to run a rental house. I'm trying to be a cinematographer. I'm trying to work on certain types of projects and create certain type of imagery. And the gear is only a part of that equation. You still have a lot of other things to take into account. All right, so what do you guys think about renting or owning? I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Tell me your experience with it. Do you like owning? Do you prefer renting? I always love having these conversations with people, so love to hear from you. All right, guys, until next time, peace.